against him. He got hung up in a tree with his hair, his long hair, and was killed that way. It's not a pleasant story, but that's another story. So the thing about terebinth trees, what they speak to me is about strength and healing and resilience and shade and growth. And that is our heart for the women, that they become that oak of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And so that's how we got the name Terebinth Refuge. So I want to define the problem of commercial sexual exploitation. And really, commercial sexual exploitation is the umbrella, and trafficking is underneath. And how that looks is, commercial sexual exploitation is really the trade for anything of value or a promise of something of value for a sexual act. And so when we talk about commercial sexual exploitation, that can be two people involved, a victim and a buyer, and it can be three people in trafficking where you have a victim, a buyer, and then you've got your controller, your pimp, your trafficker. And in Minnesota, our law says that for commercial sexual exploitation of a youth is now under 24 years of age. So we, in 2011, in Minnesota, we passed the Safe Harbor law, and that law basically said that any youth found exploited or trafficked should be considered a victim and not a criminal. Well, most people go, well, my goodness, of course, you wouldn't. But the reality is, back in the day, people looked at these girls, and I have to first tell you, I say girls and women a lot. The reality, boys and men are being trafficked and exploited as well, but I've done all my work with women and girls. But no child wakes up and says, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up. That just doesn't happen. And we've slowly understood the grooming process and the reason these young people get pulled into this horrific life, and then how they are really trapped in that. And so we passed a law that said any youth should be considered a victim, and we also really helped our law enforcement to understand how to work with these victims, and then we increased some penalties at that time. Again, the working definition includes two people, so that could be pornography, that's exploitation. It could be strip clubs. It could be, what's very common is survival sex, and what we're talking about is homeless people, young people. It's very common for runaway children to be approached within 48 hours by someone who wants to exploit them. And that's survival for roof over their head, or food, or something to, drugs maybe even. So that's considered survival sex. So exotic dancing, those are other definitions of exploitation. So we passed a law in 2011, and then our legislatures approached the Minnesota statewide trafficking task force and said, we want you folks to develop a system of care in our state. And I was a part of that task force, and we divided in groups and we worked on that, and we came up with the Safe Harbor No Wrong Door model, and the legislator passed that. And at the time I was working at the Heartland Girls Ranch, and so Heartland Girls Ranch became one of the first of 4 organizations in 2016 I developed the Hearts for Freedom program for teen girls who were sexually exploited. Since then, Safe Harbor has really grown. We have programs throughout the state. We have advocates around the state. We have a state director. We have navigators in each region of the state that are point people to help people to understand, to teach, to find resources for law enforcement when they find a victim and all of that. So this is a really amazing model, but unfortunately, there's not much in our state for adult women. Again, Minnesota, women up to 24 qualify, but it's kind of like you say, all of a sudden they're 25, it's like sometimes people's attitude is, well, you need to grow up now. You need to go get a job and do something that's legitimate. And what people don't understand is these women, their barriers are so steep, they can't even picture themselves in a healthy future. So some sex trafficking facts. This world has a huge problem. And there is sexual exploitation and trafficking going on all over this world, all over our country, all over our state, and even here in our cities. A lot of times people think it's a big city problem, and the reality, it's pretty much everywhere. And so they talk about it being a 32 billion industry of human trafficking, which includes labor and sex trafficking. And there's really no perfect victim or perfect situation. A lot of times people right away think of the movie Taken. I don't know how many people ever saw the movie Taken. And that's the movie where this young person gets been watched, and then they are just grabbed off the street and put in a trunk, and then they're off and being purchased and bought and all of that. That can happen, but it's more rare. It's more about relationships that were built, familiar type relationships and grooming and that. So it can look different for each person. And again, I can't stress how much survival sex is really a big part of people just surviving to make it in this life, and then they're trading sex for a roof over their head or eating. And there really aren't any current accurate numbers. We have there's a hotline, national hotline, that takes in calls, and they know how many they get, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of how many people are out being exploited and trafficked. And again, homelessness really drastically increases the likelihood of someone being exploited in that way. So what we're talking about is a problem that is there's no shortage of demand, which is really very, very sad. People willing to buy people. It's the second largest black market business in our world. It would be drug sales would be first, and then gun sales below human trafficking. And what you have are highly skilled traffickers, exploiters, people who have really good skills. They train each other. You can actually go on Amazon and buy books to be a good trafficker. And then they are using power, control, force, blackmail, a lot of ways to keep people in their grips. So this is just a wheel, and I'm not going to read through all that, but you can see the power and control it takes to really control someone in trafficking and exploitation. And so we're talking about economic abuse, coercion and threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, denying, sexual abuse, physical abuse. It's a very violent lifestyle. So this is about the kinds of cases that you're going to see in our state and in our country. And we often first talk about the boyfriend pimp. And I always laugh because I think about when I was young, we kind of had this image of the pimp with the big El Dorado and the big hat and the feather in his hat. And that was back in the day, I guess. But this day, you don't know who it is and what they, who they are and what they look like. It can be men, it can be women. And it's not that easy to spot. When we talk about boyfriend pimp, back then, often it was about picking up a girl on the street and approaching her and go, hey, you're really sweet, you look like a neat gal, and just all that sweet talk. You could be my girl, you look like you need some food, you need a place to live, I can be your man, we can make it in this world, just this grooming. And that happens, but what's happening, you guys, more than people realize and know, is online recruiting. And it's happening a lot. And there's a lot of spaces where people are buying young people just to have sex with them. And there are so many spaces, and it's as easy as ordering a pizza. And so what some traffickers do is they get behind the computers, and they're going into spaces where young people are, and they're hearing young people saying, oh, my life is no good, my parents don't understand me, I'm bullied at school, I feel anxious, I'm depressed, I don't have any friends. They're saying these things, and then these people are just sending messages out to them. Hey, you look like a nice gal, I see you like this sport, I like that sport too. And then they just start working it, and they'll take their time, and they'll groom those young people to the point where the kid thinks, oh, this guy's really cool. And he might be saying he's an 18-year-old boy, when in actuality it could be a 38-year-old man. And they just work it and work it and work it. And then eventually at some point they say, hey, I'm going to be in town. Let's meet at the McDonald's. I'll buy you dinner. And then I've heard of this happening. I've had people call me. And then suddenly that girl is gone. And so kids need to be warned. Kids need to be told, don't talk to people you don't really know on the computer. You don't know who that is. You don't know what they're saying is true. So that's something I always tell parents and grandparents, to really be vigilant about what kind of social spaces young people are on. But there are so many. And I can just say really quickly, there was The Central Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force just put out a new video that just gives information, and Terabinth's on there, and they show one online chat where one of our trafficking task force officers is going into space, and he shows, I put in Minnesota, it narrows it down to Minnesota, and then he types in there, female 15, and someone pops on male 18, something like that. And then and the guy's like, what are you on here for? Well, because he's an officer, he can't say sex. So he says, same thing that everyone else says, laugh out loud. And then the guy says, sex. And then within 4 more lines, he's making plans to come up to St. Cloud to have sex with a young girl. And that's the kind of thing that's happening. Okay, homeless runaway, we already talked about that. Online pornography, a person could do a training on pornography. It really fuels this issue, and I tell young people that's going to damage your brain. It rewires your brain if you're looking at pornography, and it just fuels the issue and really will destroy your opportunities for a healthy relationship in the future. But that's the people in those videos are being trafficked and exploited. Adult clubs and entertainment, we've always historically said, oh, when you turn 18, you visit the club. But that's not a good thing. The people in those clubs are being exploited and trafficked, and often there's a lot more going on there, even behind other rooms and other places. And that's where some women have actually maybe started by, well, if I dance, I can make some money because I just don't have any options. But then traffickers come in and kind of grab those people as well. Peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer recruitment. Traffickers don't like to get nailed and get charged, so they're making sure the women and the girls in their control are going out and getting more girls and doing the recruiting. And I've heard situations in schools where actually young people are setting up other young people because they want something of value, and they get them to be raped or abused by boys in the school. So that's peers actually doing the trafficking themselves. Parents selling their children for money, that's more common than people know. Money or rent or drugs, and that's more common than people realize that's happening. Family operations. So I can tell you really quickly about a gal who is a survivor, amazing gal I've known for years. She was at the Heartland Girls Ranch, and she eventually worked for us at Terabinth as our case manager for a time. And her story is one of being a child from a very dysfunctional family. Her dad actually killed himself. The mother was handicapped. And so she and her brother just kind of ran the streets, and her mom was a drug addict. And so she met this family, this guy, and he met up with her, and you're really cute, and I can be your boyfriend, and blah, blah, blah. And in a couple weeks, she went to a picnic of his family. And she said it was really fun. They had barbecue, and people were playing yard games, and I played checkers with this one uncle, and blah, blah, blah. And weeks later, he goes, you know the uncle that you played checkers with? He died, and I'm going to the funeral, and I really want you to come with me. And by then, this is kind of her boyfriend, and he's cool, and has been giving money to the mother to get groceries, so she's kind of bought in. And so she gets permission. She talks about driving out south, up 35W, and getting to the outskirts of the cities. He stopped at a gas station, pulled into had her come into the bathroom, made her strip, and he beat her from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet, threw her in the trunk of the car, and that was then years of being exploited and trafficked. And that was the notorious Evans family, and if you kind of Google that and look for Evans family traffickers, this was years ago, in the early 90s, I think it was, upper 80s. And she said the brothers, the uncles, the grandpas, the dads, everyone were traffickers. And so she eventually, with the help of others and she was years later able to they had a 40-point indictment against this family. They have been trafficking teen girls all over the country and into Canada. So that's a family situation where that's their business, the family business. Online escorts and sexual services, you can, as I said, like ordering a pizza, you can find some of these online places. It used to be Backpage.com was one of the ones that was very popular. They shut that down but there's many more. And what's happened since then, the officers tell me, is that they make it harder. A lot of these online services are on other countries, so they can't easily track them and prosecute them. Massage front businesses, maybe some of you've heard of massage parlors that got shut down in St. Cloud area that were fronts for trafficking and exploitation. And then that company gets shut down, they just pick up and they go to another city and open again. So that's another way that it looks. So fishing and hunting season. We're all big fishermen and hunters here in Minnesota, and what I understand and have learned is that a lot of the bars going up north turn to strip clubs. Traffickers are opportunists, so they're looking for men that are on their own, away from their significant others, and they want to get business. And so when we talk about sporting events like the Super Bowl, you probably heard during Super Bowl there were all sorts of task force working to stem the tide of trafficking. Well, it's anything, whether it's NASCAR or Final Four, wherever there's going to be men grouped and a lot of them, then these traffickers are moving their women and girls to those places. So that's another gal I've known for many years. She talks about having to walk across the ice on high heels to service someone in a fish house. And the same gal also talks about how, and this tells you the mindset, and she was a teenager. Her trafficker put her on a plane to Las Vegas to work a convention of men, a business that was having a big convention. She had to work that convention. She wired all the money back to him and then dutifully got back on the plane and came back to Minnesota. And most people say, you had all that money. You could have just escaped to California or anywhere. And she said, he basically, the first week I was with him, I watched him beat a girl mercilessly in front of all of us and say, this is what's going to happen to you. And when she got on the plane, he said, don't think you're going to get away with my money. I'll kill you. And I have people watching you. And she just believed him. So she did what she had to do. Older women grooming and soliciting boys. I know there was a case of that. It's been quite a few years now in Alexandria, a woman who was caught doing that. And then a lot of times other criminal activities involved, like gang activity. Gangs think this is a great way to make money for their gangs. Drugs and thefts are also a very big part of this industry. So who are the traffickers? We talk about individuals often. We talked about family operations, small businesses. I always reference a business in St. Cloud 6-7 years ago that was a dog grooming business, and the woman doing that business was trafficking girls out the back door. Gang, I already talked about gang networks and that type of thing. So it can be a variety of different ways for who's doing it. So there's 3 phases of this, and the first is really the recruitment, grooming, and conditioning of a victim. And so we're talking about grooming this person by being flirtatious, giving gifts, promising really big things and amazing things, early exposure to prostitution, a promise of a better life. All those kinds of things, this person is grooming their victim in that way. And once they've done that, then it's the initiation and the breaking point. And sometimes, I've heard it so many times where the gal says, yeah, we were just really cool and it was neat and I really liked him. And then he said one day, I'm falling on hard times. I just need you to do this one thing this one time because we need some money. And then it just is something that continues to happen. So that first customer, or you have what they call a guerrilla pimp, who is a very abusive, very aggressive, and he might just have a gal gang raped, and she's just broken at that point. So physical abuse, pornography, and blackmail. It's pretty common, especially online these days, that someone will ask a girl, and you might have even heard stories of this, and said, after they've developed that relationship, send me a picture of yourself, So they're asking for a picture. Once they get the picture, if it's a, nude picture, then it's like, he's got her. Because he says, if you don't do this, if you don't give me more, I'm going to send this to your school, I'm going to send it to your church, I'm going to send it to your youth group, and everyone's going to know what kind of person you are. So that person is trapped. And then they just keep working it. And that's kind of common. That's what we got to tell our young people. Use some common sense. Don't do those kinds of things. I already talked about making an example of a victim and using chemicals. So some traffickers will put their women on drugs, and it's called a leash, to make them keep coming back for more. And others, many of the women we work with at Terebinth, have addiction issues because this is how they've had to cope with what horrific things they've had to do day in and day out. And then it's always that situation where it's a trauma bond, where they're like, it's that Stockholm syndrome where it's like, well, he loves me, I know he loves me, but he beat me because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I should have brought in more money. And it's just that cycle of, he loves me, but yet he hurts me, and just being so trapped in that. And at the same time, their self-esteem and their self-worth is going lower and lower and lower, and they're being told this is what you're good for, no one's going to want you after this, those kind of messages. And if you turn yourself in, you're going to be the one in trouble. You're going to go to jail. You're going to have the criminal record. So those are the ways that they keep them in. And then it's just maintenance, threat of physical violence, threats to family or children. The gal who got beat from the head to the toe, her mom was in a wheelchair, and her trafficker would say, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to go burn your mother's house down right over her. And, a teenager's going to do what they have to do to save their mother. Exposing the trauma bond, isolation. I always think shame should be in the very middle, because by now a woman is so defeated and feels so shameful and so worthless that can keep her right where she's at. Learned obedience. I always think that one's interesting because this was quite a few years ago. I went to a conference where there was a pimp there who had actually became saved and became a Christian man, and he was on a panel, and he talked about back in his day how they were always looking for Midwest girls versus Southern girls. And he said, because we're hard workers, we're obedient, we don't talk back to authority, and that's what they were looking for in qualities in a person they could control. Addiction, poverty, homelessness, all those things, criminal history, all those things really keep a person trapped, and it's just maintenance for the trafficker. So it's called being in the life when you're a person being exploited and trafficked in this way. It's like a subculture, and there's a way to be, and there's a whole lingo, and there's just a way that people are. But as a person in the life, the trafficker, the exploiters take away all your support, your family, your church, your jobs, your school, any support people, and they keep you moving so you don't always know where you're at or anyone you can reach out to. And then now all the options for yourself to be able to get out really start to disappear. So some physical indicators. It's pretty common for traffickers to feel like they own this person, so they brand them. They might put their name or some symbolism, and they tattoo their victims often. Not that everyone you see who's tattooed is being exploited, but it's pretty common. Often injuries in various stages of healing, because they don't have a chance to go take care of things, and they're beaten, they're burned with cigarettes, they're strangled. And the thing I have to say is they get this from their trafficker, but it also can come from the buyers, because buyers have the attitude, well, I paid for you, I can do what I want, and then they're more and more doing or wanting the girls to do what they have seen in pornographic films. And so they often are just as violent. History of strangulation, firearms or knife wounds, malnutrition, you kind of eat when you get something, and drug and chemical dependency. So those are some of the things that a person might see from a victim. So again, who are the victims? And the victims are vulnerable people. And often they are runaways, as we talked about. You think of a young person who's maybe being abused at home, and they're running away. I like people just to think for a minute about if you could imagine being someone who's like 39 years old, and you were sexually abused as a child, and that kind of set you on a trajectory to be exploited at around 13 or 14 years old, get caught into because you've run away from home. And then you think about, for years and years now, by the time you're 38, you have mental health issues that are very intense, PTSD is very common from the layers and layers of trauma. You have lost, most likely, any schooling. And so when you think about, now I'm away from this trafficker, I need a job, how would you even consider getting a job? How would you fill out an application? How would you make a resume? What would you put on the line that says, what jobs have you had? How would you look someone in the eye and try to interview? You feel like the dirt of the dirt. And so they have the mental health and the physical issues, and then there's, how do you get a house if you don't have an employment? And how do you get employment if you don't have a stable place to live? So everything for a woman who's been exploited and trafficked since their teen years and now into their adult years, they can't even fathom. When they come to us, they can't even imagine a healthy future and what that could be or what it could look like. And so addiction issues, again, that's pretty common. Criminal charges. So again, the trafficker doesn't want the charges, but you need to bring this amount of money, so they have to go steal something and get it back to get money, or they have to steal from their buyers or whatever, and so they're also getting the criminal records. And sometimes women have children in the life, and so the traffickers will hold that child over the woman. The woman might not really have a love for herself, but she loves her child, and she's scared that they're going to be taken into social services, and so they feel very controlled in that way. And that we already talked about family members in the sex trade. And then we talk about foster care and how important it is for kids who go through the foster care system tend to be very vulnerable, and how much they really need to have good supports around them as they age out of foster care. That's very important. So, to talk about Terebinth Refuge, we are a Christ-centered shelter and a safe home that brings hope and healing to adult women, free them from sexual exploitation and trafficking. And at Terebinth Refuge, we are set up so we actually can do in both of our shelter and our transition homes one mom with a baby or a child under 5 years of age. And I hope someday we can do more, because there is a need for that. So what happened is, as I said, God led me to this community and in St. Cloud area, and we have a Central Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force, and they had been doing amazing work and discovering and finding out how bad the problem is. But what they didn't have was a safe place for women to get out and to be able to heal. We have a sexual assault center that provided services, and that was good, but what they noted back then was trafficker, they knew they got arrested or got picked up, and they said, you need to go to these services, and then the trafficker would drop them off at the services, pick them up, and bring them back. And so what they recognized is we needed a safe place for people to heal. And so we opened our doors in April of 2018. I came to the community in 2017 and actually started the organization before that. And it's been just such an amazing blessing to see how God has really how much this is his work and how much has really blessed the ministry. And so we ended up with a house that the city of Waite Park owned, because they were going to use it for the amphitheater project that has now been built in Waite Park. And they said we could have it for about 2.5 years. And then what was really neat is the mayor came, everyone came to see how much that first year the community poured into this house. So the main floor was fine and had 2 bedrooms and a master that we used for office. And that first year in 2018, the community came in and built out the whole lower level so we could have 10 beds, 9 women and a baby. And so when the mayor and everyone came back and said, we can't take this from you, we don't really need this house. And so they approached Martin Marietta. Some of you might know who they are. They're the rock quarry, gravel quarry business. That's a national business. And they are very philanthropic. They believe in buying the properties around their granite quarries, because most people don't want to buy a house where you're going to get a shaking here and there. And long story short, the city spoke to them and said, would you consider buying this house and leasing it to Terebinth for free like we get? And they did. So they're our landlords. We don't pay rent. And to further the story, there's another house right off the backyard, which eventually became our transition house, and we pay very, very, very little for the 2 houses. So it's a huge blessing. But we can serve, as I said, in the shelter. We can serve 9 women and a baby. And since about The day we opened our doors, we have served approximately 122 individuals. Some of those went, said, I got to go, I'm not ready for this. And we say, when you're ready, come back. And we've had people come and go. And we've served women 18, and we've served women as old as 57. And 7 children we've had, and about 682 crisis calls. Someone calling saying, I need help. I need to find a safe place. I'm in a bad situation. And so we obviously couldn't take all that many, but we are able to find resources for them and find safe places for them to go. So Terebinth Refuge has 2 houses, again, our shelter and our transition. The shelter is the first 3 phases, and transition is the 4th phase. And they come in, and we usually give them like a few days just to sleep and to rest and not put any expectations on them. And they're kind of starting to figure out who we are, and because their trust level is very low. So they, we approach them, as I tell people, as a Christ-centered shelter. God made it clear to me we would not force, course, or require Christian programming, but we approach each woman as how we see Jesus approach people, right where they're at, loving them, caring for them. And if you walk into the home, you just feel the Spirit of the Lord, very much beautiful things on the walls, and every woman, gets an opportunity in many different ways, which I'll explain in a few minutes. But they come in, they rest, and then they start working with our case manager to work on goals and in our holistic model of healing. And then our transition is phase 4. And not every woman chooses to do that phase, but by the time they get to that point, they have a job, they're saving money, or they're going to school. And transition is a place for them to go in and just to practice their skills. It's not really staffed the same way they have case management continued. Staff go over and do some groups, and they get involved in the activities. But they're working, saving their money for their first and last rent in their first apartment or wherever they're going to go. And we continue to support them until they're ready to move out. And it's been really exciting and fun to see women. We're able to use community resources. People have blessed us, I've got a bed, I've got this. And we make sure that they've got the starting things in their apartment and help them to get going after phase 4. So we do have a holistic model approach, which is healing in body, mind, soul, and spirit. And I will explain each of those. So body health is really first about being in a safe place. You can't heal if you don't feel like you're safe. And so we have a very safe home. We have safety measures in place. We have a great relationship with the task force officers. We have a panic button, which we really haven't had to use once. And so it's a safe environment, but it's also a very beautiful environment. When you go out in the backyard, you feel like you're in the country, and there's this beautiful big backyard, and then in the distance you see this big hill, and down on the other side of the hill is the granite quarry. But it's very right on the edge of town, keeping us close enough to be able to get women to appointments and for them to get jobs, but just in a place where you feel like you're in the country. It's a safe place. Also, we really work on training all of our staff to be very trauma informed, and that's always something you're continuing to work on, because you never know what's going to trigger someone. And we also want to be a place where we're very sensitive, and women, really come out of a lot of horrific stuff, so it can be very traumatizing if a person's loud or aggressive or any of those things. So we're careful about what we give them for paperwork and all those type of ways to be trauma-informed. And the other big part about body health is our registered nurse, and she is there 2 days a week, and she's assessing each woman's needs and making sure they're going to trauma-informed doctors that are sensitive and caring. And then also she does a lot of education. So you can imagine, if you've been living this life for all these years, you've missed a lot of things about healthy nutrition and wellness and those pieces. And it's been neat because we've really also worked on giving alternative ways of healing. We've been using essential oils instead of, opportunities for women. If they're feeling anxious, they can smell, sniff their beads that have this certain essential oil to help bring that calm down versus pop a pill. So we look at different ways to help them to start that healing process, and exercise and physical activity. And then we talk about mind health, and that's mental health and chemical health. And as I said, many of the women who come to us have chemical issues. If they need inpatient treatment, they have to do that first before they can come to us. But many of our women do outpatient with some of the local community organizations where they can go several days a week and work on their treatment in that way. We have survivor advocates. Some of our advocates that we hire have been survivors. We're very careful to make sure they're well healed into their life and able to be a person to walk alongside our women, which is very powerful for them, because none of us who have ever experienced this can even imagine. And to have someone who truly understands is very powerful for our women. We do trauma-based therapy. We have a crisis counselor, and it's been a neat journey. But we have a consultant who actually was the director of mental health of Catholic Charities in St. Cloud. Emily now comes 20 hours a week. And originally we had her for like 4 hours a week, and our women would come in, and we originally tried to get them therapists right away out in the community. They'd never go to the appointments, so we brought Emily in, and then she could just start that therapeutic rapport. But over the last just recently in the last year, we've increased to 20 hours, which has made all the difference for our women. There's less likelihood of them to leave right away, because it's a free will stay. If they don't want to be there, they can go. And so having a crisis therapist who's there 20 hours a week, she's seeing the women. If they want to talk for 10 minutes, if they want to talk to her for a half hour or hour, she can accommodate that. And then she also does some critical groups that we offer for the women, some sex trafficking exploitation specific groups that help the women to understand what really happened to them. And so she leads some of those groups. We have a partnership with Angel Reigns. Has anyone heard of Angel Reigns in our community? It's an equine therapy program for people coming out of trauma. So they work a lot with veterans and work with sex trafficking victims. And at Heartland Girls Ranch, it was all about horses. Every girl had a horse, and I have seen the amazing things that horses can do for people who are really hurting. They're very sensitive. Something that people don't know is a person who has high levels of trauma tends to have a higher resting heart rate. And when they're around horses adopt that rate and help lower their rate when they're with them. So horses are like, God did something pretty crazy and amazing with horses, because they really are sensitive. And I remember even at Heartland Girls Ranch where horses would pick certain girls, and this one horse always knew which girls were the fetal alcohol girls and would go to those girls. So it's hard to explain, but it's amazing. Horses are therapeutic. So we do that. The women love to go. It's not about riding. It's about spending time with the horses, brushing them, talking to them. It's really a neat thing. And then my board chair happens to raise Great Pyrenees. And he said, once we're established in a local place, permanent, he'd give us a puppy. So I came with Lily on my shoulder 2 years ago. And she is now about this big white fluffy dog that lives in the backyard, comes in sometimes. But the women love to walk her and brush her and to spend time with her. She's just such a love and really an asset to our program. I talked about our sex trafficking education groups, and then all our other groups of healthy relationships and coping skills, and those type of groups that help them to start to heal and understand how do you relate to people, what red flags do you need to know when you're getting into relationships. And we already talked about the chemical dependency, that we partner with community-based organizations. And then soul health, and that's really, I like to describe that as an opportunity for the women to discover those individual gifts, talents, interests, abilities, skills that God puts within each person. And we want the women to really know who God wants them to be and what they can do in their future. And so how we do that is first education. So if a woman wants to get her GED, her high school diploma, go to tech college, if she wants to we have a gal finishing her cosmetology, another one talking about welding, potentially going to welding school. Wherever they want to go, our case manager works to help them get the education that they need and helps them fill out the paperwork and get the funding and all of that. Then the other piece that's really critical is employment readiness. And so we have an amazingly strong employment readiness program in which the women do some interactive modulars on the computer to do the basics. very basic things that we took for granted, learning in high school and growing through our lives. They have not had those skills and just do not know how to keep a job. And so you're learning those basics, those soft skills. And then they go one-to-one with an advocate on applications, resumes, and mock interviews. And then we have been so blessed. I knew when I started Terebinth I would one day have a social enterprise, because we want the women to practice their skills. And at Heartland Girls Ranch, I started, through the Ignatius Foundation, I started a little business with the teen girls. It was Hoofprints of Hope, and they made little charms and things, horse-related things. And I knew when we came to Terebinth, we'd want something that was more substantial. And this was totally a God miracle, but one of our volunteers, who had been doing Basic Care LLC for over 20 years, handed us her business. And it's a business of natural soaps, deodorants, bath bombs, lip balms, just a whole line of natural products, that are healthy and have only natural ingredients. And we turned it into the Hope and Healing store. We sell online and we sell at events. So I've gone to different, when I speak somewhere, they bring the store and set up all the tables. They do farmers markets. And we actually have 5, I believe, locations. So the Clearwater Plaza has our products up in their gifts in their shop, and a few other places in St. Joe and the Gathering Grounds in Avon. So we have places. The women come into the Hope and Healing Store after they've interviewed, and they are doing the production. They're making the soaps and the deodorants, all of those things. They're cleaning them up, wrapping, doing all of the work, and getting to use, I think of one gal who was very creative, and she added her touch of some creative wrapping and those type of things. And for me to watch the women at an event stand behind the table and set up this beautiful display, and then watch them interacting with customers and telling them about the products and selling is just so rewarding, because you're seeing this confidence grow in them, and it's really preparing them to be able to get into a job of their own and be successful. So that's been a huge blessing for us, and we're always working to scale that, and you can order online. It's amazing products. I stand by that. So those 2 pieces, and then recreation and leisure. And so we often use volunteers, and I'll ask a volunteer and say, what is it you have a passion for, and what would you want to teach our women? And so volunteers come in and do, you name it. I mean, from gardening to crafts to sewing to baking, whatever their interest is, we ask them to come in and volunteer and teach the women. And you never know what woman's going to take to something and just want to do it the rest of her life, or a talent or a gift comes out that they want to continue doing. And so we do those recreation and leisure activities. We get them out. We got a grant from Julian Williams, the Central Minnesota Community Foundation. So we now have bikes and cross-country skis and snowshoes and kayaks. So it's been fun in the winter to get them out, being able to do some of those, and in the summer to do those activities. So that's soul health. And I just, again, it's really neat to see a woman discover, hey, I'm really good at this, and they want to keep doing it. Or they really decide, I'm going to be such and such, and they go to school, and the little successes we celebrate, because that just continues to build for them. And then spirit health. As I said, we are a Christian organization. God made it clear to me that we really would not force or coerce or require, but it's very much, when you walk through the door, you feel the presence of the Lord. We often have Christian music playing. Our women have opportunities to go to the churches of their choices. We have some volunteers who come do Bible study on Wednesday nights. We go to special Christian activities and concerts. And we have a chaplain now, which has been a huge blessing for us. We have a woman who got her chaplaincy and had worked with us for a while, and someone who truly understands trauma. So she comes regularly and just builds relationship and prays with women if they want to pray, and just takes them to church or different activities like that. So we are very much surrounded by prayer. Each woman, we have a prayer warrior. So I always tell people, if you're someone who feels led to be an intercessor, we get people who are willing to say, I know the first name and the age, and they pray for every woman, for that woman. So they have one woman and they pray for her. And then eventually, as a woman, if she's interested, she can send prayer requests, and her advocate will let them know what's going on for her. And then we have community churches that pray for us. So that's really a foundation. We know that's where the healing is coming from. And we know because it's such a difficult situation these women are coming out of, and just what they bring into the home with the pain and the bondages and all the stuff that they've gone through, we really need to be soaked in prayer, and we believe in that strongly. So how you can help, if you're interested in helping, is praying for us. We covet your prayers. Being able to give financially, there's opportunities for that. And, might be far for volunteering, but we've had groups from churches do one activity for a spring cleanup, or there's a lot of possibilities. And, there's just different ways. In kind, we love it when people get a whole bunch of cleaning products or paper products or personal hygiene products and bring those to us, or food. And so that's another way. And just really talking about it and helping people understand this issue is very much happening around them. And a lot of people don't believe that, but if you really start researching and if you start looking for the signs, you will recognize that it's a huge problem. And so being able to educate others, and also making sure that our young people are being warned and protected against, the kinds of things they can get into. So that's my contact, and I'm ready for some questions. I don't know how long that was. I meant to look at a watch because I tend to not to know how long I'm going. Is there any questions that I can answer? Yes. That's a good question. She asked, how do the women come to us? And okay, so there's several ways. We are very involved with the Central Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force. They have 3 officers that work Central Minnesota, and if they find a woman in a situation, they can say, are you ready? Do you want to go to Terebinth Refuge? We have a crisis card that has our tree emblem and just our number on it, and I put those at life pregnancy centers, because sometimes the traffickers are sending their women there to get tested, or telling them you're going to need an abortion or whatever. And also mental health centers, the hospitals. I've spoken at a lot of groups in the hospitals. Any place that I can leave those cards and help them to be able to pass those out. And again, we only put the number in the tree because we don't want any woman to be caught with it and get beaten for it. And when we answer that, we go, are you safe? Hi, my name's so-and-so, are you safe? That's what we say. So that's another way. And then with Safe Harbor, there are navigators all around the state. So every region of the state has a navigator that's a point person. And so sometimes we'll have a navigator call, I have a woman in Rochester, and she's looking for your services, and we work that way. We're now getting women also. I'm part of the Samaritan Women, which is an international organization that's it gives resources and training to Christian organizations. It's a really good organization. And so we're getting some women from out of state now because we're part of the Samaritan Women. And what other ways? Self calls, people know about us, and hey, or I know someone, can you, that kind of thing. Yeah, 18 and older. There are a lot of programs for youth in our state. That's where we've excelled, and very little for adults. Yeah, it's different for each person and how quickly they progress, as you would imagine. I would say we average about 9 months, but we kind of figure 2 years is about max. Not that we're going to kick someone out, but we've had people 9 months to a year be able to do the program. Well, Well, what's really another amazing blessing is we just this summer got a house from the Sisters of Little Falls. And it's not in our location, so it's a house that we're considering using for women who go through our program but can't get a safe place because they have no history. They've had criminal records, and sometimes the only thing they can get is a really rotten apartment where there's trafficking and drug dealing going on, and we don't want them in that situation. So we're thinking about using that house as a chance for them to build renter's credit. Not really a program, but build renter's credit for about a year, and then they can get something better. So that, and then Martin Marietta, we're looking at another house they might be giving us. So I hope and pray that at some point we can really, it's also, we're talking staff and hiring people and being able to staff places. If we were to try to open another shelter right now, and hiring is kind of hard right now, and but I know, we trust that God, and when that happens, that we'll be able to do that. So, did that answer your question? Okay, I think you had it.
So, have you ever been threatened by any of these people?
No, so basically, most traffickers don't want to get caught, and they're arrogant, and they'll just get another girl, or she'll come back to me, One time we pushed the panic button, and that was someone drove, and what's neat is the way we're situated, we're on a street, our shelter's on a street where you can't park along the side, you have to keep going, or if you pull in the driveway, we have cameras so we can capture a license plate. And we had and we have cameras so we can see all around the house, and so we had a situation a couple years ago where someone dropped someone off, and this person was walking up to the house, and one of the women recognized them and got really scared. So they all went into a room, locked the door, called law enforcement, pushed the panic button, actually, because within 3 minutes you got people all surrounding. And he watched him as he was knocking and looking in windows and walking around the whole house. Now we have Lily, and she'd be barking like crazy. But that was the only time we really were like, and the police came and took him away. But other than that, these guys don't want to get caught. They just wait, we'll get another girl. I don't know. We try to keep, anonymous, but, I don't know. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, especially the trafficking task force that has 3 officers. That's all they do in central Minnesota is work trafficking cases. Janelle Kendall, our county attorney, has been really good about prosecuting traffickers and buyers. I don't know if anyone saw or remember, I don't know if you get the St. Cloud Times, but back right before I came to St. Cloud area, they had an article in the paper and showed pictures of 86 buyers in St. Cloud area, and it totally freaked out. I couldn't have come at a better time because I was speaking and people were like dumbfounded. That person went to my church. That person worked in my business. I couldn't believe it. And people this is happening in our community. They just didn't know. And there was 86 faces of people who had bought sex. And the officers do these reverse stings where they put they said, they've been to the chief of police of Waite Park, who's on my board. He said they kind of figured there was a problem when they posted an ad, a fake ad, and within 24 hours they had like 87 calls to that ad. And that was kind of the start for them to realize how bad it was. Other questions? I don't know how much time I have. So. As you're talking about for services? Or, I think we do the holistic thing well. If anything, the need would be to have a house where we could have more moms and more kids. You'd have to have a daycare license to be able to house more, and that's kind of a need in our state for any adult women. And many of the women we serve have children that are, they were taken away from them. But we've had women be able to work with child protection with their younger ones and have been able to reunite. And so I would say that's probably a need that's there, that even throughout the state there's not many places that take children. Yeah, it would, our house, we just couldn't put more than one. We have one mom room and a child under 5, because then you're talking about school and all these other pieces that you'd have to do. So, other questions that I can answer? And we can talk too out in the foyer, but sure. I know there is, and I know for us we kind of fluctuate a little bit, and I know that in the state of Minnesota, besides Breaking Free and now Action 169 Way in southern Minnesota, for adult women, we're about the only ones. And there's a big need out there, and but also sometimes getting women to come, you have to really work at that too, because they're scared. Yeah, yes, some of them have healthy people in their lives, and we make sure as a case manager is helping them with those connections too. I mean, some of them come from some very difficult, and their families given up or don't care, and but there are, I can think of again one gal who worked while she was in our program to get her child back, and that was really neat. She was able to get her young toddler back. I think of a gal who came to us early on, and she actually came from a country in Africa, and she was escaping a bad relationship. She ended up in Minnesota. How much time do I have? Okay. And she found a friend on Facebook, and it was a gal, and she lived with her for a little while, and then this gal introduced her to this. I can't keep this place. She had some excuse. We have to go to this place, and this guy ended up trafficking her all over the country. It was a God-ordained thing because someone really stepped in at a point for her, and she ended up at Anna Marie's, which is the domestic violence shelter, and they called us, and so this gal came in, and it's really neat to think about what she went through in our program. She went to school to adult basic education, eventually got her high school diploma, but during the same time she took CNA courses, and she got a job in a nursing home as a certified nurse's assistant, and she worked that. She bought a vehicle and took driver's training with us and had to practice, got a car, and then talking to our case manager, then she was like, I don't know if I want to do CNA work. It's all the rest of my life. And they looked into other things, and we partnered with Avivo in St. Cloud, and she got a medical transcriptionist certification. And so by the time she left us into her own apartment, she was working in a radiology department doing medical transcriptionist, had her own apartment, her car, and has done extremely well. And we've got several stories like that where women have been able to get on a path of healing. And it's a lifelong path because, we say you got to keep the therapy going because it's the trauma they go through and what they've been through is a long step for healing. But to have the skills to be able to work and to have your own place and to be on that path is good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a spiritual problem, and the reality is the demand is there. There is people willing, a lot of people that you sometimes don't even realize that are willing to buy a woman. And as long as there's demand, it's going to continue. So it's really about heart change. It's about rooting out pornography if there's a way to do that, because that fuels it, literally fuels it, and is really trapping people in that. And it's really hard because it's really a bad, So I know there's been organizations there's one in Duluth, Men as Peacemakers, and they have intentionally worked with men, healthy men, to be game changers because a man's going to listen to another man, and they do things for women. They have groups. They talk about how they can really encourage their young boys to be respectful, and it's really educating. and getting men to say, hey, I'm not going to do this, and they actually sign a thing that says, I will not exploit, I will not buy, I will not, all that kind of thing. But to get more men involved in that way and know the harm that's being caused and be actually a game changer for positive is really important.
First of all, you're an excellent presenter.
Thank you. Thank
When you look at the ones that come to you,
Mhm.
that are 18 and above, that all started for a lot of them very young, right?
Yeah.
What happened that it was so late before some?
I think what happened, well, first, you're right. We find that a lot of the women we work with were sexually abused as children. And so that kind of gets your mind already kind of messed up. I think it's, now that we have Safe Harbor working well in our state, there's more of a chance of finding those youth, a probation officer, a social worker, or someone finding this homeless kid. There's just so many kids out there. And then you've got this mindset, this is all I can do, and you just keep going and going, or you have someone who's trafficking you till you're maybe a certain age, and then you just don't have any options, and you're still selling yourself to make money. It just, there's so many, and they don't all just get the connection. I think our state is doing a lot better than a lot of other states because there's actually pretty good awareness, relatively so. I am always surprised because I speak so many places. I think everyone should know this. A lot of people don't. But in Minnesota, because of Safe Harbor and all the work, there's task force all over our state, trafficking task force in different areas, Wright County, all the different counties. And so I think with the work we're doing, we're finding more of the young people and finding people, but still, there's still a big gap. And boys and men are now even more an issue, and there are like 2 programs, Safe Harbor programs, up to 24, that can serve young boys or men, but that is just another whole area that, that needs more work. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen yet. I know with the Samaritan women who I shared with you about that, they are really trying to train organizations because I think there's going to be just a flood of victims, and we know there's a flood of victims, and I'm praying for miracles for some things to change in our country. But when these people are found, there's going to be a real need. And what we find in our community is the officers know that some of this is going on in the Somali population, but they're very private and they don't really let people in. So we don't see or aren't able to address that yet with that community. Well, we really, when a woman goes into phase 4 and after they've worked with our crisis counselor, we get them hooked up with a therapist. And the reality is they're going to need that therapist or a therapist for well into their life, for most of their life. So that is a big part of it. And then some of them like to continue working with like angel rains because that is really powerful, and that's who they gear themselves towards as victims of trauma. And there's other programs like that in our state that have used horses as therapy. So that's what I know of. Yeah. Yeah. So we immediately when they come in our program, we get them set up, and we work with Breva Health that help us to get them on medical assistance or Minnesota Care, whatever the program is. And so when they're with us, we get that set up for them, and then hopefully as they continue, and if they'll use that unless they get a job where they're able to get health insurance and that type of thing. So we make sure that they. When they're in our program seeing our crisis counselor, we contract with her, so she doesn't need she doesn't bill in that way, but we definitely make sure they're getting on those benefits.
I just retired from Sturgis County.
Okay.
I inspected hotels and
Oh,
hotels,
yes.
and I didn't see any of it, but we did require them to go through sex trafficking training,
Yep.
and I'm sure it happened, but I'm just shocked that they never saw it.
Well, I am too, because the officers would tell us that there were actually hotels in St. Cloud that would turn their head at 10 o'clock, and they'd charge certain different rates because they knew what was going on. So now there is that law in Minnesota where all the hotel industries have to show they've taught people some things and keep record of it for the inspections. And what the officers are saying they're seeing even more of is it being pushed into apartment buildings and into houses. And I've had people call me, what do? I think down the street there's something weird going on. There's girls coming back and forth and lots of vehicles, and where did I think it was on that video they talk about how there was a guy who just gave his house for use in trade of having sex, and so he just let the traffickers use it. So but it's still happening in our hotels, because it's basically someone's going online and saying, yes, I'll meet you at such and such, I'll pay this much for blah, 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 and then they meet there, and it goes on still there. And traffickers are making tons. It's highly lucrative. Highly lucrative. I mean, we can't even imagine the amount of money, cash, that they're coming away with, that they don't pay taxes on. And, so they can buy a house. Right. So like the buyers, the Johns is what they're, it's okay. They could do better. Like the officers say, they'll get a person and, it was my first time, everyone's first time. And we, at the Sexual Assault Center, they have a class that they have to sometimes pay like $700 to go to a class to listen to people talk about what they're really doing. And they obviously get a criminal record or a charge, but it's not, for buying like that, you're not necessarily put in jail for any long period of time. It's the traffickers too that we have to really go after, and that's a lot of work for our officers. But Janelle Kendall's office has, besides prosecutors, she has data analysts, she has a whole team that works. They have to work really hard to catch these guys, but she does. Any other questions? Sure. Yeah. Yep, and some of the kids are trafficked out of school, and that's happening. And when you say demographics, again, that also reminds me that buyers, 18 to 60s, white males is the general. I mean, obviously it can be any race or whatever, but married, have families of their own, of the buyers. But kids, children that have the vulnerabilities, if there isn't the strong support at home and just someone being aware of what they're doing, not having their phone at night, where that's where you can be messaging people, and just really parents need to be, like the officer said, I've never had a parent after this happened wish they had had less contact or understanding, and it's really being intrusive as a parent, knowing who their friends are, and really having that open dialogue. Because I always say, if you just, what's going on with your friends, and what's going on in school, and if you kind of act shocked when they tell you something, they're probably not going to come back and tell you anymore. So it's really having that open dialogue of what's going on, and have you seen any of this? Okay, I have one more thing I can tell you about that I found out about, I've been talking and sharing, is, has anyone heard of sugaring? Anybody? I thought I saw a hand. So our colleges today are promoting sugaring in their newspapers. It's basically a girl can get a sugar daddy, and she's a sugar baby. And basically they're saying you have control, and this guy's going to pay for your books, your tuition, your clothes, and you just have to date him, or you have to just talk to him. And I went to the Catholic youth group in St. Cloud and shared things with them, and I asked them, has anyone heard of this? And one girl raised her hand. She said, I go to North Dakota State University, and I lived in the dorms, and there was a competition between the girls on the first floor and the girls up on the third floor. And the girls on the first floor were making hundreds, and the girls on the third floor were making thousands. And so you know it's not just talking to someone on the phone. And she said they came in and shut it down. They had someone from the school. But you can imagine if you don't have that moral ground and that support, and you need the money, how tempting it would be as a young person to do that. But that's happening in our college campuses. It's really a commentary on our society and where things are at, and Satan's destructive nature to really destroy people. Yeah, they're looking for someone who cares, someone who gives them that special attention, someone who meets that need. And that's how many get trapped. Yeah, and they think they have control of that. And the reality is these people know, they work at figuring out what that child needs. Oh, you don't have parents that care about you. And they'll work. Exactly. Oh, I'll care about you. I understand. I had parents that were like that, and I can take care of you, and just work it. And they'll take their time. And I remember seeing, where a girl said, "Oh, he just gets me. He really understands me, and he's really kind." And and they're kids. Their brains aren't developed.
Let's give Cece a big thank you.
Thank you.